Okay, let's commence. We're running late. Good evening, everyone. Tonight's year is called Why Do the Wicked Prosper? Tied in with that is the Kabbalistic reason to the 10 Sefirot, to the 10 emanations. For those who have been in the Shurim before will recall the 10 emanations, the 10 Sefirot. In each world there are these 10 emanations of God. The God reveals himself through these 10 vessels or these 10 garments or these intellectual and emotional capacities. Like we reveal ourselves through our intellect, we churn something, we understand it, we go through it, we express it, we feel it, we express it, we act upon it, etc. And this is not done by accident. We are created in the image of God that brought into being these 10 emanations. They are called the Sefirot. Sefirah is in Hebrew is a count or a measure. In other words, everything is measured in this world. God calculated exactly how to properly harmonize all of the godly revelation in order to create a physical world that on the one hand conceals godliness, but on the other hand and allows for free choice, but also leaves enough for us to be able to connect to God, recognize God, see God, understand God, and by doing so create an intimate relationship with God. What is the purpose and the reason of these 10 emanations? We will discuss today. But before we do so, I want to first commence with a question. Why do the wicked prosper? The Gemara tells us, Derech Ereshaim Tzleha. The way of the wicked is very successful. It seems that you look around, there are many wicked people, many unjust people, yet they prosper, yet they are successful. They live long, healthy lives. A lightning bolt doesn't strike them. They can live very long lives and transgress all of the commandments, moral and ethical commandments, even ones that are universal, regardless to the Torah. And it seems that everything goes well for them. Why is that the case? There is an interesting verse in Parashat Netzavim, in the book of Devarim, and there in verse 29, in chapter 29, verse 18, it speaks about how God made a covenant with the Jewish people. And don't think that you can run away from this covenant, that a person who will think that he can ignore this covenant and then say, V'hitbarech bilvavo lemor, and he will say in his heart and come to a conclusion in his heart, Shalom yeyeli, everything is going to be good for me. Ki b'shrirut libi elech, for I will go according to the dictates of my heart. I will continue my life in accordance with the decisions that I have made, and I will not give any regard for the covenant that God made and the promise that God made. This verse lends itself, specifically because of the end of the verse, which will take me too long to explain, but lends itself that there is room for a person to be able to counter that, to consider that seriously, and to be able to say, look, everything, Kiba Shalom, everything is going to be well for me. Why would he say everything is going to be well for me? Because it's going well for him now. A person who is already, and there the verse beforehand lends itself to, we're talking about a person who's intrinsically rotten or is intrinsically wayward. So if he's intrinsically wayward, he's coming to the conclusion that everything's going to be okay for me because it's okay for me now. In other words, I can totally disregard God, totally disregard the covenant. God says, lest there be amongst you that says and believe like that, Ki lo yoveh Hashem seloach lo, Hashem will not allow him to be forgiven. Hashem will not regard him to be forgiven. Why is that? What is it so deeply wicked that this attitude allows? In order to understand that, we will quote from Pirkei Avot, from Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 5, Mishnah 2, Mishnah Bet. And there the Mishnah says as follows: Asara dorot mi Adam ve'ad Noach. There were 10 generations from Adam, from the creation of man, till Noah. Noah being an exceptionally righteous man. Lehodia kama erech hapayim lefanav, to make known how gracious and how forgiving the Almighty is. Shekol hadorot hayu machisim ubayin, for all those generations rebelled and continually rebelled against God, yet God did not bring punishment upon them. God spared those whole 10 generations. Similarly, the Mishnah continues and it says, Asara dorot min Noach ve'ad Abraham. There were 10 generations from Noah, from after the flood, until Abraham Avinu. Lehodia kama erech hapayim lefanav, to proclaim how patient God is. Shekol hadorot hayu machisin ubayin, for those 10 generations also were extremely wicked and continually so, and did not stop in their wickedness. Until Abraham Avinu came and brought merit to the world and purpose to its existence, which means, and don't forget, people lived long in those days, which means that for 10 generations, there weren't enough people that would bring enough merit for the existence of the world were it not for the Almighty's patience. We know that it says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth. The beginning, Bereshit, the word Bereshit, the word in the beginning is written with a large bet, signifying that there are 2 components to Reshit. Reshit means beginning. Bereshit, the letter bet being big, draws our attention to the fact that there are 2. The letter bet is a numerical value of 2. Bet Reshit, there are 2 reasons why the Almighty created the heaven and the world. Bishvil Yisrael u'bishvil HaTorah. For 2 things that are called Reshit in the Bible, that are referred to Reshit, beginnings. The Jewish people are called Reshit in the Bible, and the Torah is called Reshit in the Bible. So for 2 things that are called Reshit, that are called beginnings, is the reason why God brought the beginning of creation into being in the first place. The reason why God created the heaven and earth, for there to be a nation that will keep the Torah and fulfill the Torah. What is the Torah? The Torah, it says in Zohar, Oraita mechokhma nafket. The Torah comes from the divine wisdom. We know it also says, Kulam bechokhma asita. The whole world was created through wisdom. In our own being, in our own lives, we know that everything emanates from the mind outwards. The mind gives instructions for the heart to pump and for us to live and to breathe and to make decisions and to feel and to move and to act and to do things. Everything comes from the mind. And from the mind itself, the first part of the mind, there are 3 dimensions to the mind, as it says in the Zohar, that there are 3 compartments to the mind which contain the 3 components of Chokhmah, which is wisdom, Binah, which is understanding, and Da'at, which is knowledge, knowing when you become one with the thing that you are processing, which the matter that you are understanding becomes one with you. The first, and then there are the next 7 emanations, Hesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchut. The other 7 emanations are different expressions of ourselves, emotional expressions of ourselves, the ability to give over, to communicate, to want to give, to want to connect. These are all the other 7 parts of our emotions that comprise our own 10 expressions or 10 emanations, which are rooted in the 10 emanations or Sefirot that God created and put into being. So we see that there is a direct link So in reference to ourselves, I beg your pardon, in reference to ourselves, the beginning of everything is chokhmah, is wisdom. From wisdom branches out everything else. So too in regards to the world. When God created the world, kulam bechokhmah asita. Everything was created in the first emanation of chokhmah, of God's wisdom, and everything branched out. That is the first of the 10 Sefirot, the 10 emanation. And then everything branches out from there. It is the spark or the seed where everything else grows from it. So you understand the importance of that first emanation, the first Sefirah. Again, understanding how we work, we will understand how God chose to work, because we are called Adam. Adam comes from the expression of Edameh. Edameh, I will be akin, I will be similar, Le'alyon, to God. So by understanding ourselves, we will then understand how God reveals himself in the world. Now, we have these 10 emanations by which allow us to reveal ourselves to others, to communicate with others, to relate to the world, to relate to others. Without them, we will not be able to properly communicate, relate, live our lives properly, constructively, etc. Let me give you an example. A teacher is teaching his students. If the teacher is teaching his students, he must then, what must the teacher do? A sublime scholar and genius whose thought process is extremely quick and all-encompassing, is about to teach someone who has no idea about this philosophy, this idea, this equation. What must that teacher do in order to properly give over that teaching to the student, to the disciple who is just beginning his way in understanding that discipline? What must he do? He must contract the wisdom. He must conceal more of that wisdom in order for that student to begin to understand a little bit. And then hopefully with time expand. By doing so, what does he do? He makes a connection, an intimate connection with a disciple, with a student. He caters his wisdom to that of the child or the disciple. By doing so, he creates a relationship, an intimate relationship, and he's able to lift the student up, allow the student to have a hakara, a recognition of that idea, and also of the wisdom of the teacher, a small, albeit, appreciation of the teacher. Correct? That would be correct. What happens then if the teacher would come along and for whatever reason, either he didn't know who the clientele were, he wasn't informed, and he thought he's giving a darush, he's giving a presentation in front of the greatest scholars, be it in mathematics and science or in Torah, whatever the case may be. How would he then cater his or just he simply is not able to draw down that knowledge enough, deeply down enough, in a manner by which could be properly received by the student, the disciple? What would happen to the disciple? To the student? Would he understand anything? Absolutely not. Will he not only understand, but he will actually detract, he will actually ruin. Why? He will totally throw that disciple or that child into confusion, into doubt, into self-doubt, into feelings of inadequacy, whatever the case may be. He will totally throw him off course. He will lose any recognition and ability to understand that idea and connect with that idea, and certainly not with the teacher, and totally be a detachment between the two. Correct? Okay. Now we understand why there must be the 10 emanations, the 10 Sefirot. Prior to the 10 Sefirot, even though they existed in a very subtle and unrecognizable form, basically what the 10 Sefirot are godly light that are catered to garments or vessels that will express themselves in a particular manifestation. Again, the 10 emanations, let us take ourselves as an example. If we are to be the example, God imbued us with a soul, with an energy, and that energy then reflects itself, reveals itself through those 10 emanations. If those 10 emanations, if the godly light is too expanded and broad and great, what would happen? The light would be too much, to the extent that the vessels will not be able to receive it, and certainly not reflect it outwards. Let me give you an example. If the light bulbs here are 60 watts? Let's give an example, 60 watts. Can you handle 80 watts? Certainly. Can you handle 100 watts? Certainly you can. What happens if I beam in all of these light bulbs 1,000,000 watts? What would happen? Increase of light, you would think you'd be able to see more, correct? What would happen? Would you be able to see anything? Not only would you not be able to see anything, you would actually be blinded and cause damage to the vessel. The vessel being the eye. So in other words, the light being the soul and the vessel being the eye do not relate, cannot interact, there's no interface between the two. There's no relationship. And in fact, it does the exact opposite. It blinds me. So too with the teacher. The teacher will blind the student, and thus there will not be any relationship. So too with our soul, and the way the soul manifests itself in those 10 emanations has to be in a manner by which those vessels fit. For example, if I'm wearing a garment, and that garment is too big on me, what will happen? I'll not only will not beautify me, but I'll falter, I won't be able to function properly. That's just a small example, but the teacher and student and the light is a better example. Therefore, going back now, from the divine light could not come creation as God willed it. For the divine light is Ein Sof, is infinite. From the infinite light would come infinite creatures, correct? Certainly not ones that have a body, of which the body is limited by time, place, etc. And certainly not one that has a free choice, because the light would be so blinding that you will not have any sense of self or existence whatsoever, and thus no sense of achievement and fulfillment, because you will not feel yourself at all. Now, the truth is that we do not have any independent existence, but God filters himself and conceals himself in a manner by which we feel that we are. And that allows for free choice, to allow us to then develop into productive human beings and spiritual entities that can develop an intimate relationship with God. Were the light to be infinite, there cannot be creatures like us today who have free choice to fulfill the Torah and reach a state of being, on the one hand, seemingly independent, even though really we're not, and you understand why from the previous shiurim why we're not, because nothing exists outside of God. We are totally dependent upon God, but we think that we exist independently, and even though that we may have a recognition that God creates the world and we're dependent upon the world and every breath is His, and even though you believe that and you understand that to be the case, but nonetheless we have a certain sense of self and self of independence, meaning to say we do not lose ourselves, our identity. We are not nullified before God's existence. From our perspective, from reality, that is the case. From our perspective, that is not the case. And the reason why that's not the case is because God filtered His divine light and then created what's called Seder Hishtalshelut, the order of descent and projection, or a process of continually going down until this physical world, is able to be created in the delicate balance that it is. The delicate balance meaning to say that there is an element of godliness, but the element of godliness is so concealed that the physical dimension, the material dimension, is preeminent, is seemingly more powerful. Were there to be creation from a higher level than that, from the higher level of the 10 emanations of the world of Atzilut, the first real world that we can call it a real world, Higher than that, there are high levels, infinite and myriads of infinite levels of divine light as it slowly filters and comes down to the world of Atzilut. Now, the world of Atzilut, from those four worlds that we've discussed before, the world of emanation, there is no creatures, there's no physicality, everything is nullified before God. They don't feel any sense of independence, but there begins to be a distinction of the light in 10 emanations. And then the last emanation, Malchut, then filters, receives all of that light, and then filters it more and contracts it more to create the next world and the next world until we get to this physical world. So it is an absolute necessity that there are these 10 emanations. These 10 emanations in the world of Atzilut is called the world of Atzilut is called the world of Tikkun. Tikkun means rectification. How is it possible that that world is called the world of rectification? High worlds is not called the world of rectification? You've heard of the concept which is very loosely used a lot today, Tikkun Olam, rectifying the world, bringing the world to its completeness, to its Tikkun. It's not really properly understood without properly understanding what this Tikkun Olam, where does it come from? It comes from the concept of Tikkun in the world of Tikkun, the world of Atzilut. The world of Tikkun simply means, Tikkun means harmony. Rectification means to say that everything is beautifully, delicately harmonized in an unbelievable unity between light and vessels. That there can then emanate from that world, ultimately until we have this physical world with physical bodies, with minds, hearts, feelings, feet, free choice, etc. Are you with me? I know it's a little bit complex, but you're with me, and slowly with time we build upon it and understand it more and more. Those that were here before will hopefully have another dimension there. Therefore, it's absolutely crucial that the world functions through those 10 emanations, and those 10 emanations are intimately associated with the 10 commandments, the Torah. And the 10 commandments contain the whole 613 mitzvot. In fact, the words of the 10 commandments, if you count them, there are 620 words corresponding to the 613 mitzvot and the 7 days of the week by which we exist. Letters. I think that there are 620 letters. Now, which really spells Keter, crown. Crown, the 620, the crown means to say that refers to, what's the crown, what's the highest part of us? Will. That refers to God's will, as it's expressed through the Torah, which is God's wisdom. So God willed for there to be a world by which we feel independent, we have free choice to be able to fulfill, study the Torah, understand the Torah, and enact upon it and fulfill God's will through the Torah, which is symbolized through the 10 commandments that correspond to the 10 emanations that correspond to the 10 utterances of creation. Let there be light, etc. The 10 utterances there. They're all interwoven and interact beautifully in a beautiful harmony. Why must this be the case? Why can't there be a higher revelation coming from a higher source? The famed Kabbalist Rav Moshe Cordovero writes that one of the reasons why God created the world is begin the Ishmodaun, in order to understand Him, to know Him, in order to know God. When you know God, knowing particularly refers to an intimate relationship. And I mentioned before on a previous occasion, when the Torah wants to use a euphemism for intimacy between Adam and Hava, man and Eve, it uses the expression V'adam yada et Hava, and man knew Hava and she gave birth. Doesn't use the expression he was intimate with her. It says he knew her, which means that the concept of knowing means that there's an absolute relationship and intimacy here. So the famed Kabbalist Moshe Cordovero writes in Pardes that one of the reasons why God created the world, and the world as we know it must work through the 10 emanations and the world of Tikkun. The 10 emanations is the world of Tikkun, the world of rectification, because it brings the world to a completeness, a Tikkun, a rectification. For without it we cannot reach that completeness and rectification. Like the teacher, if he would not to conceal his wisdom and express it in a way by which is catered for the disciple, there would not be any intimacy there. The child or the student would not be able to have a clarity in what is discussed, and a clarity and a relationship in knowing who and the quality and the loftiness and the greatness of his teacher, and develop a relationship with his teacher. That is why the 10 emanations are crucial. And the 10 emanations are for the purposes for there to be Torah. Because without it, we cannot have a proper relationship with God. And those that think that I love God and I'm a big believer in God and all of that thing, that's great, that's wonderful, and it's really powerful. But to have a true intimate relationship, it needs to be by which within the parameters and the guidelines and the vessels by which God himself invested himself. No good saying, oh, I believe everything that the lecturer is going to speak about, and that yeah, he's great and he's good and I love him and he's very good, but you will not be able to have any clarity in what he's talking about and who he is and what he's teaching you and in the wisdom of what is being taught, without churning it and understanding it and relating to it through those 10 emanations by which we ourselves also have, and receiving the 10 emanations of the teacher by which he himself expresses himself. It is impossible. This is a great gift that God has given us. Now, with these 10 emanations, there is order, there is structure, there is what's called reward and punishment. There is deserving and undeserving, which means that if you behave in a particular way, it's not that, oh, well, you're going to be rewarded for it. When you behave in another way, oh, you're going to be punished for it. That's not the case. I mean, it is in the most simplistic understanding, but that's not really the depth of it. The depth of it is that there is an order by which God created for us to relate to him, and it's impossible to relate to him without this order and structure. And this order and structure has 2 dimensions to it, 3 dimensions to it. One on the right, one on the left, and one in the middle. As it says in Tikkunei Zohar, Had arich, v'had katzir, v'had benoni. One long, one short, one in the middle, means to say that there are 3 dimensions. One long being God's love, his kindness, and that's why it's long, it's so to speak, continually God wants to give. One short is the measure and attribute of judgment and judging and justice, which is the concept of contracting. That's why it's short, that's why it's small. There are times a teacher must withhold. There are times that a parent must withhold. There are times that God withholds. And Benoni, the middle one, means to say the one that harmonizes the 2 in a beautiful fusion, like taking 2 colors and mixing them beautifully, and you get many shades and many colors, making it beautiful. 2 simple colors is nice, but it's not as nice as having 2 different colors that are mixed in such shades that you can have multiple colors, and from blue and yellow you can get blue, and you can get yellow, and you can get lighter blue and or darker yellow, and then you can get greens, and etc., etc. That's called beauty, harmony. But let's just stick to the 2. Kindness, judgment. Giving, withholding. These emanations are created not as a reward and punishment per se, so much as reward and punishment, but more as the ability for us to connect to God. And thus, if we behave in a particular way, we are the ones that arouse the emanations that are associated with kindness, with giving. If we behave in a negative way, we arouse those emanations that are connected to the concept of withholding, concealing godliness. So for example, if we sin, we cause concealment of godliness, a contraction more of godliness. And thus, almost like a blockage of which the divine sustenance and divine kindness cannot penetrate this world enough. Is that a bad thing or a good thing, do you think? What do you think? Logic tells you it must be. It's a logical thing. There must be order, just like there's an order to a teacher, just like there's an order and a structure to a classroom, just like there's an order and a structure even to family life and parenting. There must be order and structure. But your heart tells you just want to give and you just want to receive and you just want to receive without any limitations, correct? But it is to our detriment. For there cannot be any appreciation of godliness if the divine light would just shine upon us like 1,000,000 watts upon us. We would just become blinded and it would be counterproductive for us. The light, the divine light, must go through these 10 emanations. And when these 10 emanations were born or created and put into place and work, we interact with them. Let me give you an example. What would happen now if you were to experience an unbelievable miracle from God? Totally undeserving. You weren't deserving of it. You didn't work for it. You didn't strive for it. You didn't pray for it. You didn't expect it. It was an unbelievable miracle from God. Clear, open revelation of God, that God revealed himself to you at that moment. What would happen? You'd probably be elated. You'd probably feel very close to God, etc. But what would happen 5 minutes later? Guaranteed. 10 minutes or a day or a month later or a year later, you would revert back to who you are. Because that light did not interact with your vessels, with who you are. It was like a teacher coming along and blinding you and dazzling you with his wondrous knowledge and wisdom, and you were dazzled by it because he was quoting here and quoting there, and he was showing you how he knows this by heart, that by heart, and quoting verbatim this chapter and verse, this chapter and verse, this chapter and verse. But it went beyond your head. So although you may have been impressed, but you came out with nothing. You came out with nothing. You came in and went out the same person. And you would very quickly forget about that teacher. But when a teacher may have used a simple parable to convey a very deep thought, and that parable could be very simple, and he did not reveal to you all of the depth of that Kabbalistic thought or idea, but you went home a different person. You came in one person, you went home a different person. You had food for thought. You have something to ponder and think. Something that will bring you closer and a greater clarity to that idea, that thought, that feeling that the teacher was trying to convey and the teacher himself. You have a love all of a sudden for appreciation or a certain feeling of closeness and intimacy to that teacher. It happened in history. God showed a miracle and we reverted back to our normal selves. But when we worked, prayed, struggled, toiled, fell and got ourselves up and fell again and got ourselves up again and again 100 times, but achieved some godly revelation or godly level, albeit small, nowhere near compared to the million watts or this miracle that happened, this divine revelation that happened, that suspended all of the laws of nature, all the 10 emanations, all of a sudden came a light beyond the 10 emanations, didn't work through the 10 emanations, it bypassed them. A light came from a higher place. It is high, it's higher than the 10 emanations, agreed. It came from here, a higher level of spirituality. Over here are the 10 emanations. Let's pretend that we can use such imagery. Came a revelation from here. 10 emanations mean that we have to be deserving, we have to work for it, we have to strive and toil for it. But when we do, we have a clarity and a recognition and an intimacy with God and how He works with us. Even when it's negative, even when it's withholding, even when it's, inverted commas, punishment. Sets us back on the right track. We understand the consequences of our actions. We've distanced ourselves, then we become, because of that distance, we become closer and more motivated. And then all of a sudden, or in contradistinction, there is a revelation from here much higher than the 10 emanations. What happens? It's like the teacher coming and blinding you with his knowledge, but you have no recognition, no understanding, no clarity, no intimacy whatsoever. Now you understand why the 10 emanations are called tikkun. Tikkun. And there must be a harmony between them. Tikkun means drawing intellect into emotions, not behaving our emotions without intellect. And that intellect do not remain on their own, but rather give birth to emotions. Good emotions, serving God, coming close to God. Or in relationships. No good thinking you love someone. You got to bring it to bear. You got to bring it to fruition. You feel it, and then when you feel it, you express it, and you say it, and you do, and act upon it. That's tikkun. That's proper harmony. Let's say you love someone, but you never say it to them. How many people grew up as children and felt disadvantage or are missing emotion stability because their parents never hugged them or kissed them or told them, I love you. They may have loved them even more than someone who said it every day. Who was better? The one that loved deeply and great but never said it, never expressed it, always had a cold feature? Or the one that loved less perhaps, but said it all the time and expressed it and you felt the embrace? Who was better? What would you prefer? Absolutely. Let me give you another example. Again, going back to the example of the teacher. What would you prefer? A teacher that comes in and gives you all of his knowledge? Or the one that tapers it and caters it to you? Obviously. Let me give you another example. Those of us who merited to be by the Rebbe, or any Rebbe, or any tzaddik, or any righteous person. Now we know that the Rebbe had a custom of giving out when people came to a bracha, asking for a bracha, the Rebbe always wanted to harness it to good deeds and action. And that is, you want a bracha, you want a blessing, they would ask him for a blessing, he would give you $1 to give to charity. And let this be the conduit. Again, 10 emanations, the mitzvot, the Torah and mitzvot, let that be the conduit of blessing, the Rebbe taught us. Now, it's a great merit to have, and I merited to have many such dollars from the Rebbe. Now, let's say the Rebbe would set up an ATM machine. And you pass by, and when you pass by, you get a wad of $1,000. Would you prefer the ATM machine that the Rebbe put in there, stacked it up, and as you pass by, everybody just automatically, in an automated fashion, gets $1,000? Or would you prefer getting that $1 from the Rebbe? What would you prefer? Absolutely. Because you're getting the whole being, the whole entity of the Rebbe, his attention, his relationship. You're getting quality here, not just quantity. So too with the relationship of parents and children. Would a child, do you think, in the long term, they're coming to a parent and want something, and the parent says, listen, I'm very busy, but I love you very much. Whenever you need something, here's some cash. You can just come along. Oh, I'm giving you in advance. Here it is for the whole month, for the whole year. Like almost like, don't bother me. Or that the child comes and Abba or Ima, I'm having this, or having a project, I need this or I need that, could you take me, could you come? No problem, there's a chauffeur, there's money there for you, everything is taken care of for you. That's an expression of giving and love, correct? And maybe even more so than the guy who received less. I remember reading a very interesting story which I'd like to share with you. And the story is that there were two families lived next to each other. One was very lenient and forgiving, and one was strict, loving but strict, and there was order. When the child misbehaved, they was told about it, he knew about it, and maybe shouted at them, maybe even spanked them, or whatever the case may be. I don't know whether you're allowed to say that today, but that story, that's how the story goes then, when it was acceptable or normal or whatever the case may be. And one was much more forgiving, much more easy, much more lenient. The one that was more strict, the one that was more lenient, when his children grew up, never found time for him. Whenever he needed to build a sukkah, the neighbor's children who would come after being married and whatever, would all come together and congregate and help this father build the sukkah. And then they'd have mercy and go and help him build the sukkah, and he would have excuses, oh, my son is very busy, he couldn't come, or is this, or is that, every year the same story, and they understood. This family, the father needed a kidney transplant. The children were fighting who would be the one that would give the kidney to the father, would have the merit to give the kidney to the father. The other family, unfortunately, the children were just not around. This one received much more than this one, seemingly, correct? Correct? No. It was to their detriment. This one was order and structure, was to their benefit. There was a recognition, an appreciation. Maybe at the time when the father was strict, they didn't appreciate it, but later on they did appreciate it. There was a recognition, there was a knowledge, there was an appreciation, there was a knowing the father or the mother, and an appreciation of who, what they stood for, and how much love they give, because sometimes to withhold is also more an act of love. Sometimes to withhold is more of an act of love than the act of just giving, and giving indiscriminately. Therefore, why is it that the wicked prosper? Why do they have everything going for them? And sometimes people who do the right thing may have it tough. Why are they having it tough? But let's focus more on those that prosper. Let's focus about the 10 generations from Adam to Noah that rebelled against God. What sustained them? If there was an order and a structure, what sustained them? Erech HaPaim, God's patience. What sustained the 10 generations, long time, from Noah to Abraham, even though they rebelled against God continually so? Erech HaPaim, it says, Erech HaPaim, God's patience. What is this God's patience, Erech HaPaim? It's one of the 13 attributes of divine mercy. And to be sure that the attribute of divine mercy is extremely necessary. Everyone needs it, not only the wicked. When we make a mistake, which at that moment we're considered wicked, we need that patience of God, that erech HaPaim, that patience to allow us to return, to repent, to rectify, and then get back into the swing of the 10 emanations. The erech HaPaim is in fact an attribute of divine revelation that is even higher than the 10 emanations. The Zohar calls this Arich Anpin. The attribute of Arich Anpin means Keter, crown, God's will, which is even higher than God's wisdom, so to speak. Like with us, our will is higher than wisdom. Now, we know that through our mind emanates the power for the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the lips, the heart, the feet, etc., the hands, etc. But when you will something, it bypasses and suspends your intellect. Your intellect will not interfere with will. When you will something, even if your intellect says doesn't make sense, shouldn't be, it's wrong, or whatever the case, I can't do it, will bypass it, because will does not have a particular vessel that is intimately related to. It just shines its light. Automatically, all the vessels, i.e. all the limbs, will just go and do what it is that you will. That's another example of the difference between wisdom and the 10 emanations, the rest of the 10 emanations, and a higher power. It just suspends. So there's no interaction. It is a light that's called makif. It is beyond and it is detached. So that light is a light that is too beyond us. Of course it interfaces with the world, it interacts with the world, but not in a way that you feel it and you understand it and you can't appreciate it. Too high. I don't have the lens to see it. I don't have the ears to hear it. It's too high, it's too detached. It's like the teacher full on giving me all of his teachings. It's just way beyond me. That is the attribute that sustained the wicked. That is the attribute that sustains the 10 generations, because God wills that there should be a world and God's patience reigns in order that there should be free will. Because if we were to err or sin and immediately, so to speak, the consequences would be immediate, there would be no free choice. Or if every generation would be removed and banished from the world, then there would be no world. And God wants and desires a world. Therefore, God shines His light not from and bestows His divine life and light to the world, not from the 10 emanations that are here, but rather from the divine patience or the divine will that is up here. Now I ask you, what's better? What's more beneficial? Some will argue and say, well, isn't it greater to get a greater from a greater light? No, because you will have no recognition of godliness, no clarity of godliness from here. In fact, you will not appreciate it at all because you cannot see it and appreciate it and understand it. No relativity to it. Even that is very, very filtered as it comes down to the world. To the extent that you're receiving benevolence for God, but you cannot even relate to it and appreciate it. You will never ever come to recognition of a godliness from that level and attribute. And that's why the wicked person in the Deuteronomy, in Dvarim, in the verse in the Tzavim says, he blesses himself. In other words, he congratulates himself, pats himself on the back. Everything is going to be good with me. Because everything was still good till now. Why? Because it didn't come from the 10 emanations. It came from a higher level that is beyond reason, beyond relativity, beyond your deserving or undeserving, just simply from the divine will that there should be a world with no relativity to you, beyond your capacity, beyond you whatsoever, in a degree that is so filtered that you cannot appreciate come from God. Let me give you an example. A king catches a bandit. The bandit is part of a big clan of ruffians that cause havoc in the town. The king keeps him alive because he wants to catch all of the bandits, and especially the chief, if he catches the chief. So he feeds him. How does he feed him? He throws food into the cell, just throws it. They don't even give it to him nicely on a plate. He may get the best steak, but he's getting it from a place where he doesn't even know, and that there's no relationship between the giver. He may get the best steak. Whereas when a person perhaps may have very simple fare, bread and soup given from a loving mother, with a face, with a shining countenance, placing it with a placemat on the table, here my dear, eat, enjoy, maybe a simple fare like bread and soup, not a nice fatty steak that the king from his royal kitchen gives it to this guy. He's sustaining him because he wants to sustain him for an ulterior purpose, not for any intrinsic purpose. In other words, he exists only something that is external, not intrinsic, not internal. To receive the divine light through the 10 emanations, albeit a little bit more limiting, is to build a relationship with the teacher, with the parent, with God. Crucial. There cannot be a world without it. There cannot be a tikkun, a rectification of all worlds without it. So when the 10 generations of Adam to Noah and Noah to Abraham received their sustenance, they did not get it in a way of intimacy, of love and of affection, in a way that fosters the ability to have clarity who it's coming from. The wicked person who's having Shalom Yehi Eli, everything is going well with me and will be well with me. Ki b'shirirut lebi elecha, will go in accordance to the fancy of my heart. How can he even say such a thing? He only says such a thing because he's not getting his divine benevolence and light and life from the 10 emanations in a manner of order and structure, that he can then slowly build himself and appreciate where it's coming from and build a relationship with God. He's getting it in a way that is indirect. That's called God's patience. And in Kabbalistic terminology, it's called Arich Anpin, which refers to higher than the 10 emanations, which refers to the divine will. It's existing simply because the divine will wills it, but not because that there's any intimacy relationship. And that is similar to a miracle. For whatever reason, God makes miracles, sometimes deservingly so, sometimes not. But a miracle is not something that we achieve on our own steam, and therefore it's not concrete. It doesn't endure. But when I achieve something slowly through my 10 emanations, it endures. To receive the divine light in such a manner, in the manner of God's patience, so to speak, Arich Anpin, higher than the 10 emanations, is in fact fosters more chaos. As we see in regards to that wicked person who rejects the covenant with God. What does he say? It allows him to continually live in this falsehood, false existence. Everything is fine, everything is good. And it says God will never forgive him because he detracts from the whole purpose of creation and will never achieve a level, because of his selfishness and ego, ever reach a level of appreciating and understanding where the benevolence and kindness and life and light that he receives comes from, and build a relationship with God, which is a purpose of God's kindness in creating the world in the first instance, as Rabbi Moshe Cordovero writes, in order to understand God. The 10 emanations are the key, the ladder to understand God. Understand, to know, to know God, not to understand, to know. And what did we say? To know means to become intimate and one with God. That is the greatest thing that we can ever have. And although we'd love the sustenance to come in a manner by which bypasses, and many times it does, the order and the structure of deservedness and not deservedness, and many times it does, because God shows patience to those, not only to the wicked, but those who don't want to be wicked, want to repent, want to come close. But he more wants us to relate through the 10 emanations. For a person who succeeds as a wicked person has defeated the whole purpose of why he was created. Achieves nothing. And these 10 emanations are intimately bound up and connected to the Torah, for without it we cannot climb up the ladder of those 10 emanations. For Torah also comes from the level of God, the divine wisdom, just like the 10 emanations began with the divine wisdom. They are interconnected. Tlat kishrin mitkashrin da beda, it says in the Zohar. 3 knots are intertwined one with the other. Oraita Yisrael v'kudsha b'rihu. The Torah, the Jewish people, and God. That's the key. So we may want to receive more and have the greatest of success, but it fosters chaos. It fosters more division in the world. It fosters lack of clarity, more concealment of godliness, and defeats the whole purpose of creation. And our life is totally wasted. Just like the qualitative relationship between a parent and a child, not quantitative. It is the quality that will build that child. So too, in the quality of the teacher relationship with his disciple will build the disciple, not the quantity of the knowledge. Because if it's the quantity of the knowledge, he will lack everything. And that is what sustained those generations, but it wasn't to their, it was to the divine will, but it wasn't to their benefit. It was to their detriment. It is the world of Tikkun, the world of Atzilut and downwards. It is those 10 emanations that are called Tikkun. They're called Tikkun, right, rectified, complete, because that's what it leads us to rectifying the world, rectifying our souls, making a harmony between spirit and body, between light and vessel, between God, us, and the world, etc. And that is the difference between what the Kabbalists called Or Pnimi and Or Makif, a light that is beyond, or a light that is invested and enclosed within us. A light that is enclosed and invested within us, within the world, within us, is a light that is catered, or a spiritual spark that is catered to me and to you. The ant will have what it needs. The leaf will have what it needs. My mind will have what it needs. My heart will have what it needs. All in a structured and organized fashion, because that is the mechanism by which then I can grow and develop and come to recognition of godliness, intimacy with godliness, knowledge of God, clarity of why I'm here, a clarity of godliness. Because that light is one that interacts with me, with who I am, with what I am. The light that is beyond, that higher light that sustained the world whilst they were sinful, is a light that is beyond. There's no relativity, there's no intimacy, there is no connection. It defeats the purpose. Are there any questions? Yep.